It's so great to have you all here today, especially on one of the first nice days of spring. It's the first day, well, actually we had some Startup Week events last night, but it's the first full day of Startup Week, so I'm really excited to have you here for our keynote panel. We have some really great speakers, and I'd like to introduce you to them in just a moment. I'd first like to thank IBM for being a sponsor of this event. So if everybody could clap for our sponsors. We couldn't do it without IBM, and we're really happy to have them. My name is Rachel Herder, and I direct the Intellectual Property Clinic here on campus, and we provide free legal services for innovators and small companies around the state of Pennsylvania. But I'm boring, and these people are interesting. So what I really want to do is introduce you to them. So we have Matt Roda. Matt Roda is actually not a graduate of Penn State yet. He'll be graduating in 2020. He's currently a biochem major, and he's also the Chief Marketing Officer at Reflexion. Did I say that right?
Reflection. Almost.
Reflection, I'm sorry, Reflexion. You even had the pronunciation up on your website, and I still phonetically said it wrong. He is making a product called The Edge, which helps track the brain health of athletes to make sure that concussed individuals are taken care of and that are notified of that. Next, we have Aniyia Williams, who's also a graduate of Penn State, an 07 graduate. Her major was music with a minor in business and Italian. She is a co-founder of two nonprofits, one called Zebras Unite, which gives resources, or it wants more ethical and inclusive movement for startup founders. She's also a co-founder of Black and Brown Founders, aimed at giving resources to underrepresented people in tech. She's founded her own company called Tinsel, and if you see that awesome necklace, it's tech jewelry. She worked at Voxer, and she's also held positions at a family business. She's also a singer of classical music and opera, and we're really happy to have her. Finally, we have Matt Woods. So we have two Matts on the panel, so I have to keep track. Matt Woods graduated in 2015 in mechanical engineering. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Xact Metal. His passion for innovation started very young with Legos, and ever since he's ended up being interested in additive manufacturing. In 2017, Matt co-founded Xact Metal, and that's aimed at democratizing high-end metal 3D printing solutions. So please join me in thanking all of our panelists for being here today. Great. So with that, I'd like to sit down by the panelists, and we'll get started. I'm going to start the discussion with a few questions, and then we're really looking forward to having you all participate in the discussion. So we'll be taking questions in just a moment. Great. So to kick it off, would you each kind of explain your path to entrepreneurship and how you got started in thinking about entrepreneurship, either as a young child or while you were at school in Penn State?
I guess I'll go first. All right, so great, I get to break the ice, cool. So yeah, entrepreneurship wasn't really something I ever thought about as a kid. In fact, I didn't even think about engineering. Like, I just enjoyed taking stuff apart and sometimes putting it back together, but it was kind of that problem solving, like wanting to learn how things worked type of mentality, I think, that led me to entrepreneurship, because that's basically what an entrepreneur is. They just take things apart, figure out how they work, and then try to make them better and see how they can improve on the system. And I think that's kind of, in a sense, what I've done my whole life, even if I didn't know it. So yeah, that kind of led me to where I am today. I don't know. Yeah.
For me, I did grow up in a family business, but I never really thought actively about becoming an entrepreneur until I had worked in technology for a few years, which there's a whole story as to like how I went from being an opera singer to working in tech. But if we just kind of fast forward to that part, I was working at a startup for a few years before that. And in my case, I just had this problem that I was kind of dying to solve. The company I was working at the time specialized in making basically like a walkie-talkie app for smartphones. This was like before there were like 9 billion messaging apps out there, and the iPhone was still a relatively new and hot thing. And so I was using audio all the time. I had moved to San Francisco, so I was always using my phone. I'm a musician, so I was always listening to music. And I got tired of digging my headphones out of the bottom of my purse all the time and like spending forever untangling it. And I was like, I want to be able to like wear this on my body, because then that way it won't get tangled all the time. But I spend too much time putting an outfit together to have like wires everywhere, and I don't want to have like the big beats and look like a wannabe DJ. Like, this thing has to exist. It was like a product I was looking to buy, and I like scoured the edges of the internets and I could not find it. And then I got this crazy idea that like maybe I could be the person to make this thing. And then the rest is history. But yeah, that's kind of how I fell into entrepreneurship.
So for myself, I didn't start out wanting to be an entrepreneur, or that wasn't my goal from day one as a young child. This is on, right? You can hear me? Okay. Well, what happened was a problem was essentially just placed in my lap after I got a very bad concussion playing ice hockey in high school. From that, I just looked at the different solutions that currently exist for concussion testing and just really got down to the question of how can we better help athletes and how can we train them and incentivize them to care about this problem. So that was how we ended up getting to where we are today for Reflexion and the product and just all of the progress we've been able to make. So.
Thank you. So I think we want to make sure we're using the mic for the people live streaming. I think there's a lot of people in here that are dipping their toes in the water for entrepreneurship. And I was wondering, when you were at Penn State, what resources or things were made available to you that you felt helped you with your path to entrepreneurship?
Oh, wow. There's so many, and I feel like they're popping up all the time, too. So it's really, I might not even be up to date on what the latest resources are that are available. I would say really just seeking support. I think just kind of looking around. I looked at the kind of people that had influence or knew a bunch of people or just had connections, and going to those people and asking them, hey, is this a good idea? You know, what do you think? And you know, a lot of times people will just be willing to get behind you, even if you're not, you know, paying them or whatever. They just want to see you succeed. And I can't think of a better example than just the Penn State community and all the people that kind of got behind what I was working on, even when I was just a young student with really no credibility, no street creds, and just kind of jumping into this. And yeah, so there were resources when I was a student, like Lion Launchpad. I don't know if that's still around. I think it is. Lion Launchpad was cool because you can go to them with whatever idea you have and just kind of like, you know, throw it down on the table and be like, hey, you know, I've got this idea. What do you guys think? And they're willing to just kind of work with you on that and build the most, you know, kind of the crucial first step, which is building a slide deck. You know, for any entrepreneur, the quintessential slide deck is what gets you in the door more often than not. Just being able to very well position your idea in a way that makes sense to people and looks like you're not just wasting everybody's time. So I think just going through that process was really valuable. And then also they gave me the first $500 for working on this project. And man, it's like I sneeze and $500 comes out now, but it's like it was a lot of money at the time. And it was just like, it felt like I could do so much with that. And so I think having even though that little bit of resource available to just kind of start tinkering, just start messing around with the idea, building prototypes was super critical at that point in my journey. And then just from there, there's so many more resources. I don't even know if I could sit here and name all of them, but you know, just to name a few, there's you know, the people in the Launchbox now. I know that would have been really helpful for me when I was first starting, but that came a little bit after initially started the idea. And then Ben Franklin Tech Partners help once you're a little bit more mature and kind of, you know, have something that looks sort of like a business. And those guys are super, and they're out in Innovation Park, and you might not know about them, so check out their website too. And I'm probably going to forget a lot of things, resources here, but those are the key ones that stand out in my mind.
I feel like that was a pretty comprehensive answer. I would only add to it, or maybe call out a couple things that Matt mentioned, which is to say that the right place to start is with solving a problem. I think you'll probably find that as a common theme with all of us and with probably every entrepreneur that you'll meet, is that you should start from solving a problem. And then the next thing is going to be to validate what that idea is. Even though there wasn't anything I was particularly interested in solving as an entrepreneur when I was at college, I have been partnering with Penn State on the organizations that I run now, and I know that there are a ton of resources, and while you're here in the college environment is the perfect time to do something and try something and test something and take that risk before you guys have, like, you know, wives and husbands and kids and taxes and mortgages. Like, this is the move, like right here. Test it out now.
Amen to that.
Well, really, to build off that, there's some straightforward answers to that question of the Happy Valley Launchbox downtown. There's a ton of other resources, particularly mentors and people who really want to see you succeed and are really excited about that. But I would really focus on the people around you and the time in your life that you're at, where you are at a Tier 1 research institution surrounded by other brilliant and motivated students. A lot of you guys don't have kids or taxes or a mortgage or something like that. There's, you know, if this doesn't work out, whatever idea you might have, well then, okay, you're fine. Now you're 23. Oh no. There's a lot that you can do, and it's just a great opportunity surrounded by a lot of very other brilliant and innovative students who can really, you know, find a co-founder and just get started and just try something and see if it sticks.
If I could just add a couple more things I thought of while I was sitting up here. I think the value of volunteering your time is kind of understated in a lot of ways, and it got me definitely to where I am today, which is just like participating in student clubs and just getting involved, because you meet a lot of cool and really passionate people by doing that, and also just, you know, trying to leverage resources that are here, like labs, like, you know, just asking people if you can help out in their lab, even if they're not paying you. That can go a long way in just boosting your, you know, your knowledge and the doors that it can open. So I know that definitely got me to the point where I could even start thinking about the idea that started the 3D printing company. And so yeah, that's I think understated a little bit. So
entrepreneurs do a lot of scary stuff, and, you know, you don't have a predetermined path to move forward. So I was wondering if each of you could kind of comment on something that you experienced that was scary in your path, and if you have any tips to share about how to overcome fear or what you do to kind of manage that.
There's so
That's
many.
a loaded question, yeah.
There's so many. It's terrifying. Like, it's I don't know. I don't want to scare you, but like, there's also days. One of my mentors in the early days when I was first starting told me that there was going to be your 7 days of death, I think he called it. And you just need to recognize that those are going to happen, and you need to just get through those days. Like they're going to be really dark days when everything feels like it's crashing down on you, and like like your baby is basically like crashing down, and you just have to get through those days. So yeah, just sticking with it in those times of challenge are really important. I mean, there was times when my whole invention just didn't work. Like, it just seemed like the whole premise, everything we had built the company off, was just not working, and it was a fluke, or, you know, someone else came out with something better, and those are like really hard things to deal with, and sometimes you just got to stay persistent through those times. And I've even been threatened to be sued before, you know, things like that you just don't even see coming. It just kind of blindsides you, and those things can all be very scary. But I think just not giving into that kind of pressure and yeah, just kind of keep going. So
I would frame it a little bit differently. Yes, it's very hard. There's lots of challenges. I feel like we do not have enough time for me to even go through the top hits of things that have felt like impossible challenges that I had to solve. But I'll say this, there's two things. One is, I typically tell people to obviously you're starting with solving a problem, like I said. The other part of it is to really think about what it is that you're trying to have happen for yourself. Like, entrepreneurship is hard, it's lonely, and like oftentimes a very thankless job. And like if you do it right, you're going to be managing a team of people who are going to depend on you. Their paychecks are going to depend on you. Like, it's a lot of pressure. And so what I feel like is really key is that when you're starting, to have a real honest conversation with yourself about what kind of company you're trying to build and what you want that to look like as it represents where you're trying to go for your life. Like, so that when you are looking back at all the strife and the toil of what it took to build it, you can feel like it's actually something that's contributing towards where you want to be. And so when I say like ask yourself these like hard questions, I mean like literally like how much money do you feel like you need to be making every year? Like how many hours a week do you want to work? Like if you're the boss, you get to structure a business around all of these kinds of things. Like, do you want to be able to like take long vacations to travel the world like a few months out of the year? Like if you're trying to build the next Apple, that's probably not going to happen. But there are definitely businesses and ways that you can structure your business in order to accommodate that. So I think that keeping those things in mind and the things that you know are important to have present in your life and making sure you're making space for those things as you build your company is absolutely imperative, because you can be successful and build a successful company and find yourself running a company you don't even want to run, which happens to people. So so keeping those things in mind is really important. And then the other thing I will say is making sure that you have something that is not your business that brings you some joy in your life, because that is the thing that you should turn to when you have those days where you're like, somebody's trying to sue me today and like I feel like I'm gonna die. But maybe you're gonna go like, you know, play some ice hockey, or maybe you're gonna go meditate or go for a swim or go to the movies or whatever it is. Like keep some fun in your life along the way. Like that's imperative too.
So it's definitely very difficult. I often feel I should have gray hair at this point. But that being said, the challenges are possible to overcome if you can remember why you got started and really the vision that you ultimately hold. I mean, I can tell stories of like days when we thought we lost 5-figure contracts by $300 and things like that. There's other times where we lost so atrociously, it'd be like losing, you know, by a mile instead of an inch. So all of these things happen, and it's just part of the ridiculous day-to-day that can come with being an entrepreneur. But remembering why you got started, who you're helping, the passion you ultimately have for this, that's what's going to keep you going and get you through those death days, as Matt said.
I think that's all really good advice. Aniyia, this question is directed to you a little bit more. We've talked a lot about how entrepreneurs identify problems and try to solve them, and you've started 2 nonprofits aimed at solving some of the major problems in tech. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit and introduce the audience to what problems you've identified, and then maybe talk about some of your solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Tinsel, and along the way of building this company and making this audio necklace, I had a lot of experience. I learned a lot, let's just say that. And one of the things that I learned, like one, was that there's some real problems with the venture capital model. Is everyone here, like raise your hand if you know what venture capital is. Okay, most of you, great. Okay, so, and for those of you who don't, it's kind of like one of the ways that people kind of get funding to finance them building their startups. And we often think of it in the technology industry as kind of like the de facto way of like, oh, this is how people get money to like build their thing. But in truth, it's actually quite a really specific and narrow way of funding your business, and it's really only meant for certain types of companies. And so not everyone is a fit for venture capital, even though everyone is like kind of clamoring to get it. But the reasons why people are not necessarily a fit is something that needs to be examined. And so I wanted to spend more time kind of having a conversation and talking about solutions around how there could be more ways to fund startups that allow them to build their companies that aren't where the only other option is that you're gonna have to have some money in the bank and depend on your, credit when you maybe are just coming out of college and already have enough debt from student loans and all of that thing. That already can stunt someone's ability to be able to take the risk. And so I believe that more people should be able to take that risk when they are determined and they have a great problem that they want to solve, but the system is not necessarily structured that way. And that also kind of leads to further inequities, which is on the other side, Black and brown founders. One of the other things that I came to find that, in addition to women not really getting venture capital, what about, like, if we're being generous, depending on which study you look at, maybe you can say 10% of women, but realistically it's like 4% of women, all women, are getting venture capital dollars. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I'm getting a robocall right now. Sorry. And then and 1% of Black and Latinx people are getting venture capital, and that means that, again, it doesn't allow for us to be able to participate in the innovation economy in the same ways. And yet there are still people who are out there with great ideas who are still trying to build, and I think there's a lot of great work that's happening to kind of diversify who's on the other side of the table when we talk about investors. And like I said, also about, like, how do we create more, like, mechanisms to fund startups. But the other part of it is that there are people like myself that were like, I'm out here, I'm building this business right now. I don't have time to wait for these things to take root. Like, what are the things that I can start to share with people that I've learned and from other entrepreneurs who I know who had figured out some way to get from point A to point B when they were working with modest resources? Like, how do you, especially in the early stages, how do you get from idea to generating repeatable revenue when you're coming at it cash strapped? And that was kind of how Black and Brown Founders was born, really, was with the desire to be able to build a community and give information and education and resources specifically to Black and Latinx entrepreneurs, because in my eyes, entrepreneurship represents a pathway to economic security. And when you look at the numbers, there is a huge wealth gap between Black and Latinx households and their white and Asian counterparts. And so I see this as a way to help start to close that wealth gap. But there's still a lot that needs to happen in terms of educating and giving resources to these people as well. So, yeah.
Matt, Roda, your company was born out of a problem you yourself experienced. How did you find that your opinions about how to solve the problem changed after talking to potential customers? Did you?
Well, having an athlete's background really helped from the beginning, because it seemed like a lot of the solutions out there never factor in the athlete's perspective in it. Like, for any of you guys have ever taken the impact test? It's a concussion test. It takes like 40 minutes, gives you a headache if you don't have one. These are things that people don't consider. So I at least was going into it with that frame of mind, which I think really did help a lot. But then after I talked to more athletes, more customers, and really tried to broaden my perspective on the best way to help athletes, that really transformed the product into what it is today, where we don't primarily call ourselves a concussion test, because athletes, they're not incentivized. They don't care to do it. A lot of times they sandbag or try to lie their way through concussion tests. Instead, we've actually framed it as performance training, as a way to engage athletes, help them get better, win more games by increasing things like hand-eye coordination, reaction time, peripheral vision. That was something I would never have come up with unless I talked to dozens and dozens of athletes and really got their perspective on what's a concussion test like to you, and is it something you actually take seriously, or should we be looking at other options behind it?
That's great. So this, Matt W., I was blown away by a statistic in your bio that while you were in school, you figured out a way to do 3D printing that was 100 times cheaper. Is that the right statistic?
Yes.
So how did you identify ways to make a known process so much cheaper, and what was that like for you?
So for me, it was by necessity, right? I had this idea that I really wanted to pursue. So I guess I should start with, where the idea came from. When I was working at SpaceX, I was working on 3D printing rockets, which was the coolest job I could literally dream of. And I was really excited to be there, but when I was done, I still had some school left and still had some time where I could kind of, try my own thing and give entrepreneurship a stab. So while I was there, I started asking the engineers, hey, how could we improve these printers? What would you see as a way to make them better? And I got some interesting answers, and one was multi-metal 3D printing, just being able to print in full color rather than black and white, basically. And so I thought that was really interesting, and so I thought I'd just take a stab at it. And so I started kind of working on that, and it just turned into something where I wasn't expecting it to even become a business. Like I was just kind of just jumping on it, and I really just but I had the vision. Like I wanted to solve this problem. Like that was it. I got so hyper focused on solving this problem, and it just ultimately turned into how do I prove that this is even possible. And so I really just kind of set out to prove that, and it was out of necessity that I even decided to start building this metal 3D printer, because in order to solve that problem, I had to figure out how to get my hands on a metal 3D printer. And so I had asked around first. I even asked the university if I could use their metal 3D printers, and these things are typically around $1 million if you want to buy a metal 3D printer on the market. And Penn State had one lab with this resource available, and no students knew that it was available. I mean, it was very closed off. We see all kinds of technologies take this path, and it's the path of when something's new and novel, it's usually reserved for the ultra wealthy corporations and individuals who have influence and power and whatnot. And so we've seen it with computers, with the automobile. People come around and they say, well, I want to work on that, and I'm gonna make it available to more people like me. And so it's like the Model T, it's like Apple and Bill Gates making the computer for everybody. We just wanted to make metal 3D printing basically this thing that was available to more people. So we figured out we could do that, coming back to your point, which is how did you even get there? We just used a maker mentality. That was kind of what got us to where we realized we actually had a product that changed the paradigm a little bit. It made metal 3D printing 100 times cheaper by simply taking what we already know about plastic 3D printing, which is you can get into for $500, and just applying some of those concepts to what makes a high-end metal 3D printer tick. And so just combining those relationships from different sides of the industry kind of allowed us to find this really interesting middle road where we were a high-end product, being able to do what these big guys were doing, but we came at it from this scrappy, like, underdog kind of perspective, and I think that's what kind of made it even possible for that to happen. But again, it all came back to we wanted to solve a totally different problem, and then just kind of stumbled into, well, we need to make this technology more accessible just by default to even do that. So yeah.
So I'm putting you all on notice. I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment. And I'm a law professor, so don't think I won't cold call on you if you don't ask questions. But while I give you some time to think of what you might ask, I did want to ask each of you if you could say one or two sentences briefly about what is your favorite part about being an entrepreneur.
You want to go?
People. I love people. And business is people. So I think it's awesome.
I'll say the informality. I'm not one for corporate structures and suit and ties, so that's at least one of it's a side benefit, but definitely one that I really like.
For me, it's a sense of adventure. It's never being bored and never knowing what tomorrow is going to bring you. I think the problem for me being in a type of corporate job where everything's very predictable and very steady and smooth, I think I would get bored to death with that, and I just hate that idea. So I like coming into work not knowing what's going to hit me today, and just that sense of adventure.
Great. And with that, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. If you ask a question in the room, I'm probably going to repeat it back in the microphone so that our friends who are live streaming the event can hear. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, once you go out and make your own path, and how do you not get sucked back into maybe the more traditional path?
Right. And for me, SpaceX was a really attractive alternative. I have a lot of inspiration coming from Elon Musk. I think he's doing some really cool things, and he's a really interesting guy. And so while I really enjoyed working for him, and even working an entrepreneurial type of schedule where it's really intense hours and you feel really passionate about the work, I really wanted to be more like him and, in a sense, try to be an entrepreneur for myself rather than working for one. And so I think just that feeling of wanting to figure it out on your own, that's probably what drove me away from taking the comfy, cushy type of salary type. I mean, I'm just now for the first time getting a salary since 3 years. So it's definitely not comfy or cushy, but it's a really extremely rewarding path when it works and even when it doesn't, because at least you took a stab at it and you tried. I think that's what's most rewarding and irreplaceable, is that you tried.
I would just add to what Matt said and say that it's like you learn like exponentially, like so much more and so much more quickly, to the point where you're right, like it might be a few years of being broke before you actually can pay yourself a reasonable amount of money, depending on how you play your cards. But like it like you can't, there's no like school that you can go to really to learn the kinds of things that you learn when you're like at it every day trying to find the answers to these questions. And it gives you such in-depth knowledge about the area that you're innovating in as well. So yeah.
I'm a senior, so never been in industry. Will say though that I doing it, going through my undergraduate career rather than deciding, okay, I'll apply for all these traditional internships. I mean, I'm a senior now, but 2 years ago as a sophomore, this company was by no means a surefire anything. It's still not even today. So I had to make that decision of, okay, I can apply and maybe do something in biochemistry or try to do pre-med, rotationals or something ahead of time. But I just really loved and was very passionate about everything for Reflexion and just the company and everything that came with it. So going back to my earlier point of now's the time to try it, what do you have to lose other than maybe a couple of years and some hairs? But yeah.
Actually, I do want to also add to that too, because you just made me think of something which is important, and that is that entrepreneurship also can look many different ways in terms of how you decide to spend your time on it. I think you're a student right now as well, so, but like in our case, we're pretty much doing this as a full-time kind of gig. But I think that it's completely fine and okay if you do go off and get a job and you're like moonlighting and working on your business too. And in fact, that might be the way to do it. Like not everybody can afford to be broke while you're trying to make your business work. And I know that like some people kind of make other people who are working and building their companies feel like they're not as serious about what they're building because they have a day job, and that's just not true. I think everybody should do it in the way that works for them, and I just think that that's really important. So I wanted to make sure I called that out.
Who else has a question? Yeah.
I know you spoke about trying to stay away from venture capital as like the big market with that. So how did you guys go about funding your businesses? Was it more like, okay, am I going to fuel myself, or did you guys? How did you do to fuel your business?
So the question just for the live stream is, how can you get funding without venture capital? I know I didn't capture everything you said, but.
Yeah, so for Tinsel, I did actually raise venture capital, which is kind of part of how I came to learn so much about it. And we should have gotten, in my opinion, way more money, but it is what it is. We raised just like under $500,000, which is not a lot of money for a hardware company. So there's that. But on the other side of it, like the things that I talk about when I'm talking to founders about what does it look like if you're not raising venture capital, I think the most obvious thing is that, and also like you don't have a lot that you can lean on in terms of your own personal kind of funding or personal credit that you would kind of take loans on. Because basically, if you're not getting funding from some other avenue, whatever thing you do, whether you use credit cards, whether you try to get a loan or any of that, like it's going to depend on your personal credit. That's just how it goes. And so like the other options are basically you've got crowdfunding as one option, which can be incredibly competitive and hard. It's really hard to differentiate yourself nowadays there, but if you have the right targeting, it's possible. And then there's also equity crowdfunding, which is kind of allowing the crowd to be your investors. But if you have a community that you've already created, it is one way to think about monetizing them if it's not from just straight revenue. Ideally, you also would try to get to revenue as quickly as possible. One of the things that we tell the founders we help with Black and Brown founders is that, coming at it as an entrepreneur who, can't raise a friends and family round, you might be the person who's helping to support your friends and family, that you just can't really build a business at this stage that requires massive scale before it's going to make revenue. If it's going to take 1 million users before you actually start turning a profit, do not build that business. Do not build a business where you're going to be broke too long. You need to build a business where you can start monetizing your customers as quickly as possible. And ideally selling a premium product, not something that's gonna make money off of ads or cost 99 cents or whatever, that kind of thing. But anyway, so there's that. The other thing is, there's some more interesting kind of ways that people are starting to experiment with investing in companies, and there are angel investors who technically can structure a deal however they want because they're investing their own money and not money from LPs. And there should be, I think, a more diversity of options there, but that's some of the things. Oh, and then I would also add to that, strategic partnerships can be really key too, and I think that those are kind of undersold, that there are sometimes corporate partners that you can work with that you have aligned interests who would be willing to either invest in you, or sometimes honestly it's maybe they're just cutting you 25 grand from their marketing budget that they were going to spend on a conference somewhere, but instead they think that there might be an opportunity by giving that to you. So there are definitely ways to work it that way too.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. She definitely covered all the different types of funding you can raise. So for my situation, I kind of took it in steps. Basically, friends and family was key for the initial, and just trying to fund as much of it as you can from your own pocket. Just trying to save up for it, and just trying to prove out the concept, and then find the right people to support you. So for me, I used the resources at the university. So one thing I forgot to mention was the startup competitions, like Inc. University. That was absolutely crucial. We won $7,000 from that, and that was a lot of money at the time. And it got us to a point where we were actually proving a real product and business model, and then we could move on to people who are willing to give you loans, like Ben Franklin Tech Partners. They offer loans to high-risk startups just to build economic growth in the area. So that's really cool because they're not necessarily trying to make a buck like a venture capitalist would, but they're trying to grow tech companies and high-value jobs in the area. So finding people with other interests other than just making money can also be really valuable. You have to figure out what is the value of what you're building and who would be vested in that. And then just figuring out what is the cost of the money that you are raising too. I mean, venture capital, not only is it hard from a politics standpoint because you have to answer to your investors every time something's not working, you also have to think about what are they going to expect return-wise. I mean, yeah, you could get a 20% interest rate loan or a 10% interest rate loan, but if these guys are expecting, a 5 or 10x return, that's incredibly expensive, even if it seems cheap when you're first raising it, because a lot of times people think, oh, I raised a Series A or seed round or whatever, and I just got $2.5 million in my pocket. Now, what do I do with it? I throw a party, and they forget that that money has to be paid back generously, and so that's what investors are expecting. And so we actually haven't raised any venture capital. Instead, like you were talking about, we've used partnerships, and so I found something that was very rare in the area, which is somebody with industry experience who had just gotten out of a lot of years working in the industry and was a business executive. So had all of the knowledge that I did not and all the skills that he had built up over the years. And he became my basically 50% partner in the business, and we grew it together. And so he invested his own money and started getting things going, and then figured out how to raise the following money with loans and just finding different pots of money around the community. And so that's been really valuable for me, is because I like to focus on the technology. So finding somebody that can be the financier, or the one out raising money and doing it intelligently for the both of you to benefit and for the business to benefit is incredibly valuable. So that's kind of how my path has turned out. And so I'm really proud to say that all of the equity is in-house in the company, and nobody that's not there from 9 to 5 every day has any equity in the business. So that feels really good, because we can run our ship very agile and not have to answer to too many people. So
That's awesome.
If I might just quickly add my 2 cents, to venture capital isn't inherently a bad thing. You just need to really be very careful where you get your money from, particularly if you think about the motivation of some of these Silicon Valley types who might come in. They're going to put money into 10 companies, and they are literally planning that 9 of them will fail, and they just hope that the one is going to be, a complete home run. So they want to know if you're going to fail, and they want to know quickly. So you might only need $1 million, and they're going to come in and say, no, here's $5 million, spend it, go, just start burning through money as much as possible, because I want to know in a year's time whether or not you're going to be a home run or you're going to be a failure. So that's a lot of times not the smart way to do it, and you just got to be very careful what their motivation is and where the money's coming from, and if it's smart for you to take it.
Yeah.
How do you integrate your own social media branding into your ventures through diversified media outlets?
So the question was, how do you integrate your social media into your brand?
Sure. I have to ask a clarifying question first. Do you mean like my personal brand into the larger brand, or?
So within your ventures,
Yeah.
or few or one ventures, your personal brand, how do you integrate and help promote your brand and your ventures through diversified media outlets?
And what do you mean by diversified media outlets?
LinkedIn, using Snapchat, Instagram, whatever is appropriate for your venture.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to answer the question I think you're asking and say that for me, my brand has always been really closely tethered to the things that I'm working on. So I think that, and actually this is funny because I see Shalom is here, who planned a Launchbox event last night, and I was saying this at the event last night, but there's this there's a really great TED Talk / book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. I think the TED Talk is called The Golden Circle or something like that. And but I feel like the core of what we hear him talk about a lot is really, really important, and that is just kind of really leading with what it is that you believe, and having that really resonate with people, and that the rest of it they kind of will rationalize once you kind of hit that point that sparks something that they feel, right? And I think that is really important. So I feel like every person kind of has their own purpose and mission, and the things that we do tend to be some manifestation of what that is, right? And so I think that the way I think of it is my personal brand kind of being more about the things that I believe in, and that very much goes very hand in hand with the kinds of projects that I work on, right? And so I think that those things kind of tend to play very nicely together. And then with the actual company's brand that I might have, they have their own kind of mission and purpose that kind of that drive direction as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, good.
So for me, it's kind of on the flip side. I try not to spend too much time on social media. In fact, I don't do anything for the business. My partner takes care of all that. So I'm not really a good person to answer your question, I think. But at the same time, I think you don't have to use social media as much as everybody assumes you do. So I think there's other ways to get the word out about what you're doing, and depending on also the nature of your venture too, right? I mean, for us, we're not worried about building 1 million followers, because it's really about finding the industry connections and the right influencers and things like that really get our product to the people that we're trying to sell it to, whereas the broad consumer market is not really for us. So that's my answer. It's probably not the one you were looking for, but yeah.
I think that actually you touched on something I want to tie into what I also said, which is that like the key is that you want to find the people who believe what you believe. And I feel like you can find those people on social media, and that tends to be the most popular way that people do that, because we spend a lot of time with our eyeballs glued to a phone. And so getting in front of someone's eyeball, like it's an attention economy in itself, right? But generally, it can be like in real life spaces like this one. But basically, like, you want to kind of find the place where the people who you are solving a problem from, where they are, whether that be online in forums, whether that be on Facebook, whether that be on a college campus. But I think that it's really, really important, and I spend a lot of time talking to entrepreneurs about this, because this is like amateur mistake numero uno, which is like trying to boil the ocean. You think everybody is your GD customer, and that is not true. And it's like, okay, it's not like women. It might not even just be like women who are bloggers, and it might not just be like women who are blogging about food, but it might be like women who are blogging about paleo recipes, like keto diet women, like super, super specific. And it feels kind of counterintuitive at first that you would go after something really targeted and really niche, but it actually tends to be the most effective way to be able to validate what you have as an idea, because if you can nail it with this demographic first, then it becomes much easier to find out what's working and extrapolate that and gain momentum that way. It's like the small wins compound so much more faster when you're like able to isolate the variables down to something really small.
In regards to what you said about how social media wouldn't be appropriate for you, I think that, or possibly, I believe maybe LinkedIn, putting out content through there would show that B2B, what you're doing, and gain followers through that.
Yeah, no, we use LinkedIn all the time. In fact, it's probably the only social media platform that I spend any time on. And that's because our customers are actually on there and they're posting, and there's active user groups and things like that we can post in and be a part of. And so that LinkedIn has actually been a pretty useful tool. So, but we primarily use trade shows as our chief marketing outlet. Trade shows are great because the people that are interested come, and the media picks us up. So that's been really useful.
I use personal social media a lot of times just to reach out to people who aren't answering my phone calls. It's hard to convey in a quick voicemail that, hey, I'm not a salesperson trying to meet quota. I'm just trying to learn a little bit more about the market, trying to better understand, what are your needs and pressure points. So a lot of times just a message on Twitter or something like that, or, however I can get in contact with them is just social can be an extra add to that.
Yeah, back there.
What kind of advice would you have for someone that wants to be an entrepreneur but is struggling to find something that really lights a fire?
So the question is, what advice would you have for somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur but is having trouble finding what lights their fire?
I would say just try new activities. Like if you're not passionate about anything, I guess you could find a problem and solve it, right? But what you're asking is more, how do I get excited about that? And how do I, and I guess really just finding out what matters to you and what matters to other people, and then trying to combine those things and solve a problem in that space would be the best advice I can give. Just yeah, just trying out different, maybe even like what your hobbies are, like try and look in that realm. Like, what do you like to do when you're not working? That's where I found my passion, which was 3D printing. It was just a hobby for me. And I just started getting more and more involved in it. And then people started calling me an expert. And I was like, wait a second. No, I just like to do this as a hobby. What do you mean I'm an expert? And then so it kind of found me in a sense. So I'd say, you know, venturing into your what you like to do in your leisure time could be the answer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good place to start. I would also say that, like, I don't know, like the question about passion is one that I don't know, depending on the day of the week, I feel like different ways about it. Like, do you actually have to be like passionate? Because I feel like passionate is just a thing that some people don't feel, but they could still feel very driven to find the answers to the questions or the problem that they are trying to solve, and they might not describe it as like passion, you know what I mean? So I feel like passion is a little bit of a loaded term, but the other thing I would say is that there's a lot of really great like resources available now that are really about like life design. And I feel like the questions that you would ask yourself in the pursuit of kind of figuring out how you want to design your life. In fact, there's a really great book called Designing Your Life, which I think is by like these two Stanford professors, and it's kind of like applying sort of like design thinking concepts to your life and what do you want to do with your life. But like it helps you kind of brainstorm in ways that gets to the core of like, what are you happiest, or like the way that they phrase it is like it being in a state of like flow, like when you kind of get maybe a bit of euphoria from certain kinds of tasks or things that you're working on. It helps you frame and observe when those times and moments are happening, and you can take note of them and be like, oh, there's a theme here. Maybe this is where I want to be. So I would check out that book. It might help.
It's a tough question. You know, how do you find? I can't sit here and tell you like, oh, here's how you find something you're passionate about, or it's really difficult, and it's just something that I think has to come from inside you in a sense, just of what are your interests, what are your passions, or from just a you know outside of work perspective to reiterate what they were saying, that there's just a lot of problems out there. You want to be careful you don't create a solution and then look for a problem and then create that as your business, but just keep an eye out, because the world doesn't lack problems.
It does lack people who will actually execute on them, though. So
Amen.
That's your ripe opportunity. A lot of people have ideas, but not a lot of people execute. And I would actually add to what he just said too, to say that, you know, typically, you know, people are going to be most successful trying to solve problems that address things that they actually experience or for the communities that they're already a part of. So if you're thinking about, I don't know what you're studying, but maybe it has to do with something that you have in expertise, is you have a deep knowledge in that area. Maybe it's what you're studying at Penn State. Maybe you just like, I don't know, spend a lot of time playing video games, and then you end up doing something that's like in that lane, but that you've got hours and hours of time of thinking and experiencing what these problems are. Because the ivory tower like approach to solving problems usually falls flat. Like when you're trying to come at it from a place of like, oh, I'm gonna solve this problem I see, but you've never actually been intimately familiar with the problem.
Yeah, as somebody who has a boring patent lawyer job, I will say once you get immersed in a subject, it becomes much more colorful than you might at first impression think. So all I do all day is talk about 4 statutes. I basically have them memorized, but they come to life for me, and it only happens once you kind of get into it. So I know, because of the direction of my chair, I've been focused on this half of the room, so I definitely want to give a chance for this half of the room to ask any questions. Yeah. I think the question was, how did you know when to quit the industry? Yeah.
Wow. I think when I realized I had a viable other path to take, because sometimes you feel like the only path you can take is industry, and that's because it's just it's the path of least resistance, right? But I think just after you take a stab at it and then figure out, wow, this is actually something I really enjoy doing and something I could really add a lot of value to society with, then I think that's the point at which you should consider maybe taking the alternate or the path less traveled.
For me, it was after I got confirmation from my boss that he was gonna be my angel investor and give me money to get it started. I was like, oh, I got the cash to do this. I'm gonna stop working for you and start this company with your money now. Is basically what happened in my case. So it was pretty cut and dry. But one of the things that I wish I would have also actively done at that point, like, and I recommend also for lots of entrepreneurs that I meet now, these are like things I wish I knew back when I was starting a business, is to like write down, you gotta write it down. You can't just say it to yourself. Like what the line in the sand is that you're gonna decide like, okay, I gotta get a job now or some other, like I have to abort mission, because the thing is that you will also become like you may, I shouldn't say, because I remember I said passion is like a loaded term. You may become so passionate about what it is that you've built and so attached to it that you lose like kind of, you lose a sense of like reality around like what you should keep giving to it. And you will give literally every possible thing and even things you don't even have to it because you want to see it thrive. And that's a really scary place. And like I have seen many entrepreneurs be there. I have been there at one point. So I like to tell you, like, write down like what does the bank account balance have to be, like whatever that thing is, the conditions under which you like check yourself and say, oh crap, I'm here. Okay, I need to reevaluate and maybe it's time to like call it in.
So no industry experience, but I also left University Park and being a student full time to pursue this and work in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. So that was a really tough decision that I had to make. It's, you know, I can continue on the traditional path, get my undergraduate degree while kind of working on this on the side. But I realized that it just got to the point where, you know, I was so passionate about what I was doing. It had a lot of opportunity. Just the more research I did into it, the more progress we made, the more we realized that this was a viable solution to a major problem. So it came down to, all right, I'm spending 13 hours of my day trying something along the lines or related to Reflexion, and then squeezing in the couple hours of classes and work just on the side, essentially. And at that point, I realized it made a lot more sense. Like, no, this has opportunity. Let's pursue it full time. Let's finish online. Let's worry about it later, almost. But it was a really tough decision. But it was right for the company. It was what had to be done.
If I could add on to that too, because I feel like I could get a little bit more specific with what happened for me, because I think there's an interesting point there. So after my internship, directly after, I took 5 days and I went up to San Francisco just to enjoy the city. Like no plans, no tours or things to do, but I just took time to walk around the city and just kind of let my mind go, like just like kind of think. And because I didn't at that point have any plans for the summer, I was kind of thinking like, oh man, what am I going to do after graduation? Am I going to go to grad school? Am I going to get a job? And then thinking about this also entrepreneurship path as well. And so I think the point that I want to make is that having time scheduled, like idle time scheduled, where you don't have anything but time to think and just let your mind wander and just see where it goes. I think that can be really valuable, and I've come up with a lot of my favorite ideas from just doing that, just taking a long walk and just letting my brain just go. And so for me, that was kind of the point, was that 5-day stint where I decided, wow, I could really do this. I'm gonna go in this direction, and I 100% focused myself in that direction. So
Yeah.
How would you say your Penn State experience relates to directly or indirectly to entrepreneurship?
So the question was, how would you say your Penn State experience relates directly or indirectly to your entrepreneurial experience?
All right. Great question. So I am studying biochemistry and am the chief marketing officer of a company. So not super related. But for real though, Penn State, and I love talking about this because I go to Penn State, because it's so much more than just the classroom experience that comes with a Penn State degree. It's, I mean, we have the largest alumni network in the world. There's a ton of people who love Penn Staters, are Penn Staters themselves, and really want to see you succeed. And so there's, beyond just the classroom experience, which I can talk a lot more heavily on given my degree versus job, it's just a great way to network, build a community. Going back to the point of that, Penn State in particular has a ton of really valuable resources to help entrepreneurs. So there's definitely, I would just play to that and learn and take advantage of those critical thinking skills that you're required to learn as a student of higher education.
Yeah, I think for me, taking advantage of the things outside of the classroom, like you were saying, Matt. But for me, it was always drawing the connection between real world application and what you're learning in the textbook. So I was always involved with clubs and building things on the side that took what I was learning in class and literally applied it to real world engineering problems. And I think there's so many ways that you can draw an analogy there in other, if you're in marketing, take just like an opportunity to try and try out your skills in real life and, try to market an idea or a brand or something and just see how it goes. I think that's kind of really important for the university experience, is not just going to class, not just doing your homework and getting the grades, but also stepping outside and trying to apply the skills that you literally just learned. Because if you don't do it then, you're going to forget it by the time you graduate. I mean, it's that simple, right? If you lose it, or what's the don't use it and you lose it. That's the one. Yep.
I think for me, it's an interesting question because I majored in music and look what I do now. But I think that, there obviously were things that I learned in the classroom that were really helpful, but I think that some of the things, like kind of to what these guys are saying, like that I did outside the classroom while I was at Penn State are the things that maybe contributed to the most to what I do now. I was really involved with student government while I was here. And I think that for a lot of reasons that kind of helped me get some early experience with like managing programs, and even understanding the first job that I actually had after I graduated, which was nonprofit fundraising. There was an endowment that I had, started to try to set up while I was in student government, and me even getting to understand how these kind of systems and processes work helped me to parlay that into a job in fundraising. And I think that they're just like some fundamental skills, even as being a performer, that lend themselves to being an entrepreneur. Like I speak a lot, and so I'm on stage, and I'm obviously very comfortable on stage because I've like had to do way harder things than sit here and talk and in front of an audience. And so so there's a lot of things that I feel like are kind of like in the margins of what that experience was, but it actually all connects in a way too.
And if we're examples of anything, if you are a mechanical engineer, you do not have to do something in mechanical engineering. If you're, music, tech, biochemistry, marketing, you're definitely not limited to your major.
Yeah.
So I'm currently in a course where we're actually building our own small company, and we're going through the ropes and going to present this in a few weeks in front of Happy Valley Launchbox. What advice would you give to someone who's still going through this process and trying to pull all the papers together and have a final plan?
Listen to Lee.
So the question was, for students who are in classes kind of bringing a business plan to market, what advice do you have for them?
I think I would just try to take it seriously. Just really think of it as if it was your only option for providing an income to yourself or your family or something like that. Just try to put it in a real world context and really, feel the desire to do good at whatever you're doing, and then I think the grades will follow, and you'll learn a heck of a lot more if you're actually feel like you're invested in it. Someone told me that if you bet money on anything, it'll interestingly become 100% more interesting, like football or basketball or whatever. If you put money in the pot, you want that team to win like 100% more than if you don't. So I think just feeling like you're invested in it will go a long way.
What's the biggest challenge you feel like you're having in getting ready?
The biggest challenge we've been having is trying to pull our financials together and like go through cash flow statement and making sure everything's balancing out. Because currently right now our employees are not getting paid as much as we hoped, so that's like our biggest challenge right now.
Yeah. Okay, that's real. These are like more of the detailed semantics. I was gonna say that like, I'm like, that's a more, we should talk after this kind of answer. But I was gonna say maybe this will be helpful because I haven't said this yet to everyone, which is there's a couple entrepreneurs who are friends of mine who I love just like reciting things that they say all the time because I feel like they're just like such great golden nuggets. And one of them is my friend Tara, who talks about like, you know, your job as an entrepreneur is to answer these 3 questions and like, you know, kind of like don't pass go until you answer these 3 questions. And that is like, 1, does anybody want this? 2, will they pay you money for it? And 3, what features are important? And by what features are important, like what are they actually, like what is it that got them to pay you the money and that will keep them paying you money? And that once you find the answer to those 3 questions, then you can, you know, basically just pour gasoline on it.
I'm glad you're taking it seriously. In particular, entrepreneurship classes, you know, on a fundamental level, it's like teaching the scientific method. You know, it's easy to sit in front of a chalkboard and say, all right, you get an introduction, and then you form a hypothesis and problems, all those. You know, the real value is actually doing it and trying it, because that's where you're going to learn 1,000,000 times more than you ever would on paper. So I would just recommend to take it very seriously and to plan like you're going to be a $100 million company right now. You know, if you don't do that, you might put yourself in a pretty bad position in 5 years. So, you know, take it seriously and plan for success.
So teaching entrepreneurship here, I know a lot of students have really good ideas. They have real problems, but they're not going to go somewhere if they don't find the right team around. So what advice would you give to students if they know they need a co-founder, they don't know who that is, and they want to go beyond just talking to their friends? Like what systems or form of process?
So the question was related to how do you form the right team around you?
Yeah, so for me, I found that team in my circles of the activities I was doing outside of class. So, for example, I was in the Penn State Lunar Lion team, which was, I don't know if you guys heard of it, it was a Google Lunar X Prize. We had a team to try and put a spacecraft on the moon. And it was really exciting, and it brought together a lot of really passionate students. And so for me, that was like, I don't know, the watering hole, you know, for where all these students came to just work on really exciting projects. And as soon as I started working on my project there, they were all like, oh, what are you doing? This is cool. And just kind of gravitated towards it. And I think that kind of, you know, getting your idea out there, people will find you that want to work on it. So yeah, just trying to find those circles where those people are, I think is really important. And just using the network that you have to try and find people with the skills that you're looking for, and just know also who you're looking for too. That's really important.
Yeah, I like what he touched on. I think talking to as many people as possible about your idea is important, like as soon as possible. I think a lot of us also tend to be really afraid that someone's gonna like steal your idea when you talk to them, which is a valid fear, but not really, because like I said, a lot of people have ideas, not a lot of people execute. And it's a rare thing that I've seen that somebody's literally like, oh, but I'm gonna take that idea and go do that right now. Like, it's a lot of work. So I think that you will gain so much more than you could potentially lose by just actively having conversations with people. And I think that that is a great way to surface who could be your next co-founder. And I would also say that in deciding that you're going to have a co-founder or multiple co-founders, it is a bit like a marriage. At least that's how I have always approached it with my co-founders, and I think that you got to work on it like you do a marriage. And I don't think most of you are probably not married, so you maybe have no context for what that actually means. But it means that you are making decisions in tandem, that you are supporting each other, when things are great, but also when things are at rock bottom. You want a ride or die person who's as ride or die as you are, because there's gonna be a lot of hard problems, and you don't want them to run for the hills when the first hard problem comes up. And so what I recommend is by trying to filter out who those people are by having the hard conversation before you even really start doing anything together, and before you actually give them some equity in the thing that you're building, before it's too late and before you're mad at each other. Talk about what you're gonna do in these instances if something happens and you guys disagree, or what happens if for some reason something comes up and one of you has to quit. I don't know, maybe someone's mom gets sick and they can't do it anymore or whatever. How are you gonna handle that if a circumstance like that happens? And then also, I'm sorry I keep coming back to beliefs, but I just really feel like it's important. You want to make sure that you are aligned, and how you feel about the problem that you're trying to solve. Because I think what I've seen in most co-founder breakups is that at its core, they found out that they just really weren't aligned on something that was really important and vital to building the business, and they could not reconcile it. And so airing those things out early on is really important.
It's a super important question that's to be taken very seriously. It is like a marriage, and it is a really serious commitment, and the right co-founder can really make or break a business. If the problem is trying to find the right one and they've already talked to all of their friends, just trying to get themselves out there as much as possible, I would encourage, a blurb on social media. Just do a post on Facebook or Twitter, whatever it might be, to just get it out there that you have this idea. You can be a little vague, but this is what I'm trying to do. Is anyone interested in working on this with me? But otherwise, just try to talk to as many people. And if they're in an entrepreneurship class, maybe talk to each other too. Ideas might align. You never know. So
maybe you guys can host co-founder speed dating or something.
There's an idea. If I could just add on, because they kind of reminded me of my situation. In a sense, it is really important to find the right co-founders, but sometimes it's just a matter of working with the people who are willing to work with you. I mean, I might not be a good example, but I don't know how many people know this who know our story, but I've gone through many co-founders. Actually, I've gone through 4 or 5 until I found the right ones. And so you kind of find who sticks and who doesn't. And sometimes I'm not going to recommend that path. Don't just churn through co-founders, because that's not a good idea. I'm surprised that it worked, but it did. And so that's it is absolutely essential that you find the right ones, but don't think that you need a perfect co-founder just to get going. Sometimes just by being driven yourself, you'll find the right co-founders along the journey. So,
yeah, and you can trial it out too. You can kind of give it 3 months, a mutual agreement, and then you check in and say, is this working? Is this not working? And if it's not, no harm, no foul, go your separate ways.
So as a lawyer up here, I would like to point you to a free resource available to you, another free legal clinic called the Entrepreneur Assistance Clinic. And they actually have a questionnaire where you and your co-founder could, for example, work through like you would before a marriage, talking about how you think about financials and these things. I can't recommend it enough. There's a lot of stories of bad breakups of founders. And so at least by having the legal documents in place ahead of time, you know what will happen when the breakup happens.
Real talk, there are actual therapists in San Francisco that only see co-founders. Co-founder counseling is a real thing in the Valley. I'm not lying.
Any questions from this side of the room? Yeah.
I just want to know, what's your long-term plan for your business? Do you have an exit strategy, or are you planning on seeing it out?
The question is, what are your guys' long-term strategy for your business?
For me, it's to grow a valuable business where innovation is really cultivated. So I guess my long-term vision for my personal self is having the tools to be able to create whatever inventions I might dream up. And so having that business to support that vision is really important for me. But no exit strategy really, other than just growing a valuable business. And if for some reason there's a good opportunity for a merger or acquisition or something along those lines, then I'll be happy to consider it, because there's obviously other ways to explore ideas other than just having the business existing already. But not really actively looking for any exit.
Okay, I'm gonna go through each of my businesses. So for Tinsel, I actually announced a few weeks ago that we're shutting down the company. We're sunsetting it. And most of that is just because it's a really expensive business. I got tired of trying to raise money from investors, and there were other things that were really calling me. But making that decision, I'm saying it kind of very high level, but it was really hard, and it took me a really long time to pull the trigger, actually maybe too long to just call it, which is also why I'm write down on a piece of paper in advance where your line is. And so I'm now actually more open and free to do more with the other things that I run because of that. With Black and Brown Founders, the goal is to help people build profitable businesses. If we are not helping Black and brown people make cash money, we are failing at what we do. That is my measure. And then on the Zebras Unite side, it is really about creating more options and a more viable, more ethical, more sustainable startup ecosystem. Once we can start to see that the ratios are changing in terms of who's getting funding and what those funding mechanisms look like, and also that there are more conscious companies being formed, then I will consider that a success on that side.
You ask a question like an investor, for sure. But for Reflection, I mean, we don't have, I would be happy to sit here and walk you through a slide of analogous examples as to other companies that have exited. The reality is, though, that we don't know at this point. There could be a whole number of different ways, particularly for a product like ours. The potential market for it is essentially trillions of dollars. If we look at elder care, neurodegenerative diseases, all the things that relate to neurology and brain health. So there's no lack of a market for us to eventually expand into. The question will just be what's right for the company, what's right for our employees, and making sure that we as founders, or the founders of the company, consider it a success, and that everyone, as much as possible, goes home happy at the end of the day.
Any other questions? Yeah.
When creating a patent, or after you create your product, you go through a lot of tests and prototypes, and you get patent for it. How do you know if you're willing to sell that product to a different company, or keep it as your own product?
So the question is, how do you make the decision related to keeping your product or selling it to another company? How do you make those decisions of what your path is?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a lot of principles and values, what you are looking to do, like your personal direction. Do you want to do the activity of actually taking a product to market? If that's something that you answer yes to, then that's what you should do. But I mean, you can also look at it as a very financial decision. I mean, you can look at what is someone willing to pay me for this, and it'll save me a whole heck of a lot of time. You could possibly collect royalties, which would be, cash flow almost indefinitely. And then you could also look at the perilous journey of, failing and the product, not working out. And so it kind of depends also where you want to allocate that risk. But I think it would be much more rewarding to take your own invention, because there's no one that's going to feel as passionate and committed to that invention than you, even if someone else sees the value in it. So,
great advice. I feel like I also want to know more about what you're thinking about, kind of the context of that. But as a person who has a patent, I will say this. I think that patents are you're talking about patents, right? Specifically. Okay. Patents, I think, and I'm I wonder what Rachel's going to think about what I'm about to say. Patents are very strategic things to leverage for your business. And I think like on one hand, like, yeah, if you do like patent something that has like really awesome applied usage, you could always license it, make some money off of that. But unless there's like a really targeted strategy that you have around doing that, I wouldn't encourage that being the first business that you start, because it's a really, it's a tough game. Like patents take a really long time to get, and they're really expensive to get. And there's a lot you have to go through to get patents. Like, that's real. The other part of it is like, if you have a patent, then it's also your responsibility to enforce that patent. That costs more money. Saying that like if someone infringes on your patent, you're gonna sue the pants off of them. Like, you gotta have money to sue the pants off of them too. So that's why I say you have to really be strategic about how you're thinking about it. So either you've created something that intellectual property is incredibly special and valuable, and you wanna protect yourself and make sure that no one else can copy that, or it's marketing. Like, at the end of the day, investors love patents. I don't know why, but they do. And when they see that you have a patent, or you're even in the process of getting a patent, they love that stuff. I'm literally trying not to curse today. And I will say this, like, patents don't sell products. Like, your customers couldn't give two craps about whether your product is patented or not. They just want it to work and solve their problem. It won't sell more products. It's just really, like I said, behind the scenes, like, strategy and like marketing.
Yeah, there's not many scenarios that I can think of that I would encourage you to, or anyone to license a patent rather than try to take it to market themselves. It can be a lot more profitable. You're going to learn a lot more if you actually spend the time and do it. But at the end of the day, I would say it probably is, in a sense, a personal decision of what makes the most sense for where you're at. But I would definitely just discourage it from the value that you would otherwise gain from actually trying to take it to market yourself.
Yeah, as a patent lawyer, I think sometimes there's this thought that once you have a patent, you can easily sell that as a commodity. And in my experience, that people don't generally just buy patents. They want to see at least some work, some of your effort towards building a product. Maybe you haven't built the product all the way to completion, but you've worked your way there. So I think patents are harder to sell than sometimes people might think. We have time for about one more question, so this is your last chance, unless you want to ask it at the networking reception to follow. Yeah.
Besides financials, what's the biggest problem you guys have faced with your business?
The question was, besides financials, what's the biggest problem you've faced with your business?
Good preface. Yeah, it's because otherwise, yeah, financials. That's a big problem if you don't have them. I would probably say just when things don't work as you expect them to. Like, we had this product where we were, set to take it to market. We were really focused on getting it to market. So we basically launched it before it really had enough time to be validated as a product. And so we ran into a lot of technical challenges that we really didn't foresee. And then you kind of have to, the clock is ticking as so to speak. If you launch the product and tell customers this is available, they're going to start asking for it. And it kind of comes back to financials, is that you're going to run out of money if your product's not working. But I'd say that was the biggest challenge for us, is when we were having challenges with teething problems with the product and bringing it to market. Yeah.
I'd say that two things. Like, one, like, insert manufacturing problem here. Like, oh my gosh, everything. They're like, whenever you start to make a physical thing, especially like a thing that's never existed before, like, there are so many variables that you could not have possibly imagined. Like, there are so many things you can imagine would probably go wrong, and then there's like twice as many like problems you could not have possibly imagined that could go wrong, and all of those things will go wrong in manufacturing. So that's real. But the other side of it, though, I would say is like like, there's so much to be said about like mindset and mindfulness when it comes to entrepreneurship. Like, I mean, I think of it like this, like you think about like, oh, I don't know, you want to lose 20 pounds or, oh, like, I don't know, all the things that are hard to do, like that end up at the end of the day kind of boiling down to like ritual, habit, routine, and like making sure that your mental game is like ready to take on that challenge. Like entrepreneurship really isn't that different from it in that case as well. And so I feel like, for me, that has manifested in burnout that I had to like overcome. And a lot of that, you know, I had to like do the work of really kind of being introspective and asking myself how I got there. And I realized a lot about myself and my kind of overachiever tendencies, and how those kind of like played into me kind of overworking myself at times. And then also, like, I had a kid along the way, and understanding how you bring together all the parts of being a spouse and a mom and an entrepreneur is like crazy, where I think literally for the first 3 years, I just kind of did all of them like the same way that I did all of them. And then that was kind of how I ended up in burnout land too, was that I can't still like burn it on both ends when I also have like a child who's throwing up because she has a fever tonight or whatever, and it's just insane. So really understanding yourself and what your limits are, and putting more in place to kind of take care of yourself, I think has also been big and a challenge, because it's really easy to not take care of yourself. Everything becomes about the business really easily, and you just lose sight of yourself, and then you look up and you're like, oh my God, my blood pressure is crazy. And like, I literally had a friend who is a founder that like found out that she had like a brain tumor, and it was like, just, she was working so hard, and it's just like, it's crazy. And like, don't wait till you get a brain tumor to slow down.
Yeah, definitely take care of yourself. That's important. For Reflection and the way I think about it, one of the biggest challenges that we had was really understanding our market fit and who our market was. I mentioned earlier that, you know, at our core, we have developed a device that is an excellent way to test, track, and train brain function. And in that little clause of a sentence, I mean, there's a ton of different applications that we could go into, but who's going to pay money for it now? Who's going to get the most value for it? And what can we manage and create on our end? So learning and figuring out where is our best product market fit took us quite a long time, you know, because concussion test is a really easy, quick way to describe what we do, but that's not really what we focus on very much. It's certainly a part of our vision and how we can better help athletes and protect their brains, but at the same time, you know, us trying to transition from, hey, we are only a concussion test, and then I would go to a customer and try to explain something a little bit different, and they're like, I don't get it. How's that a concussion test? That doesn't make any sense. I'm done with you guys. So really understanding and learning and clarifying is probably the key word there, what your value is and to who. That was one of our biggest challenges that took us a long time, a couple years really, to figure out.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I have one last question, so I'll start because I want to give you time to think of it. But I wanted the panelists to say 5 words of what their last piece of advice is for all of you. So I'll start. Mine is talk to a lawyer early.
That's a good one. I can definitely sign off on that. So one that we have had up on our whiteboard ever since day one, we tell ourselves when things are hard, is short-term gain for long-term pain. Short-term pain for long-term gain. I said it backwards. But yeah, that's the best one.
I'm gonna say you deserve to be here. Yeah, you deserve to be here. Yeah, those are my words.
How did you guys do that so quickly? I was counting on more time. I kind of said this earlier, and I don't know if this is 5. I haven't even counted yet. But plan to be a $100 million company from day one. That is sure. It's close enough. It rounds down. Because that being, it's a great way to set yourself up for success early on.
Well, great. Well, please join me in thanking the panelists.